I'd like to welcome you to the first lecture of the 2013 Sagan National Colloquium. My name is Craig Jackson. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Mathematics here at Ohio Wesleyan University. I'm also the co-director of this year's Sagan National Colloquium, along with my colleague Laurie Anderson, who's a professor in the Department of Botany and Microbiology. The National Colloquium was begun at Ohio Wesleyan in 1984 and was later endowed by OWU alumni John and Margaret Sagan. Since its inception, the National Colloquium has served as an annual forum to explore issues of national and international significance from multiple educational angles. This year's Colloquium brings together internationally recognized artists, writers, activists, and scholars from diverse fields to encourage a broad conversation on current and future impacts of climate change. The timeliness and importance of this topic is hard to overstate. Climate change has the potential to profoundly impact human activity and well-being on a wide range of temporal and spatial scales, through, for example, its effect on international politics, global markets, agricultural productivity, and use of natural resources. Even the way in which we conceive of our relationship to the Earth, both individually and as a species, is undergoing revision as we come to understand more about the ways in which human activity can affect the climate. Moreover, this changing relationship is finding expression through contemporary art, literature, and film. I hope your participation in this conversation will leave you with a sense of how addressing the challenges of climate change will require collaboration and communication across disciplines, cultures, and political boundaries. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to Justin Kronwetter, director of the Ross Art Museum, who will introduce our speaker. I'd like to mention also there will be plenty of time afterwards for questions and answers from our speaker. So again, welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for being here this evening. We appreciate your support. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to point out to you that there is a gallery guide for the exhibition that is currently on view in the Ross Museum. Hopefully they passed one out to you as you came in, but if you did not get one, they're available at the door. And I failed to bring with me a copy of a book that has been published recently by the same title. We have, it's a beautiful book. It includes the photographs and more images of those images that are in the exhibition. We have them for sale both in the museum and in the Ohio Wesleyan bookstore. And if you're interested, you can acquire a copy in either place. I brought with me in my pocket, as many of you did, my cell phone. And I'm going to turn mine off now, and I would ask you to turn off all of your electronic devices. No texting during the talk, please, as a common courtesy to our speaker. I'd like to thank, in addition to Laurie Anderson and Craig Jackson, I'd like to thank the faculty of the Fine Arts Department, many of whom are here this evening, for partnering with us in the museum to make the exhibition of Caleb's work available for showing here at Ohio Wesleyan and for helping make his journey to Ohio Wesleyan possible tonight. I'd also point out to you that we have two exhibitions on view currently in the museum. In addition to the Portrait of Ice show, we have an exhibition called Luminous, which is by an artist by the name of John Subraw. John is in the audience this evening, and his exhibition is also on view in the museum, and I certainly would encourage you, if you've not yet seen it, to come and see that show. My introductory remarks in terms of biographical information about the artist has been projected here on the screen during the time you've been sitting here, and I assume that you've read it. So rather than reading the very same things that you've been looking at, I'll simply introduce very shortly the artist. My acquaintance with Caleb Cain Marcus is through mutual friends and supporters of the Art Museum here at Ohio Wesleyan. He and I have been together in New York City at several different events and functions in Florida, and it's my pleasure now to introduce him and welcome him to Ohio Wesleyan University. This is Caleb Cain Marcus.
All right. We got sound?
Yes.
Good. How is everyone on this evening? All right, that sounds reasonable at least. So I'm Caleb. I'm going to talk a little bit about color's influence on change, and then also a few stories from my glacier travels. So, clicker, right. 97% of scientists say that climate change is human-caused, and 41% of the American public says it is human-caused. This discrepancy is evidence that the public's opinion is persuaded by something outside the realm of science. Many things can influence opinion, but I believe one of them is photography. There are simple ways photography can influence change. A photograph has the ability to implant memory by providing a believable history. The event captured is contained by the boundary of the photograph and limited to a fraction of time, a 60th of a second or less. The brief moment and limited angle of view cannot show a complete history, and yet there is a great susceptibility to allow a single photograph to influence and create memory and history. There's a photograph from the Crimean War taken in 1855 by Roger Fenton. The photograph is titled "The Valley of the Shadow of Death." The image shows a road littered with cannonballs. Later, a second frame was discovered. In this frame, the cannonballs were absent from the road. There is heated debate about the image, but it seems this was the first faked war image. In the context of photojournalism, it's easy to argue that the ethics of an altered photograph. But if ethics are placed aside, then the pertinent question becomes, why might Fenton have altered the photograph? It might be because he believed photography had the power to change, and the cannonballs helped transmit the experience he wanted to convey. Or it might be he just thought the cannonballs looked cool in the middle of the road. Photography is still frequently used, as Fenton did, in an attempt to record a history. In regards to climate change, a documentary treatment can be useful to provide evidence of glaciers as they recede. There are many photographs that compare glaciers at different times. Peterson Glacier in Alaska is one such example. The black and white image from the 1920s shows a beautiful, massive glacier with seracs in the foreground. The color image taken from the same place in 2005 shows a vast meadow. The glacier has receded up the mountainside. Comparisons such as these provide proof glaciers are vanishing. When I look at the old image of the glacier, I feel a sadness that the glacier is gone. This is triggered because of the relationship I've developed over 2 years of photographing glaciers. They are close to my heart. However, those who do not have a previous relationship with glaciers are likely to merely take note of the comparison with varying levels of interest. A person with no experience of glaciers will likely visualize all glaciers, regardless of their location, as the same. An Icelandic glacier would look the same as a Patagonian glacier. When something is generic, it holds little importance and is difficult to become attached to. Glaciers have unique visual signatures and distinct personalities. In part, photographs can show that not all glaciers are alike. When they are recognized as being unique, the glaciers become individual. This allows for intimacy. A glacier can be loved, awed, felt, admired. The challenge is to find a way to portray not the visual representation of the subject, but the vibration and essence. By giving up the urge to document the landscape as it is seen, a horizontal expanse, one that can be penned to a specific place and time, an artistic freedom arises. This allows for new possibilities to occur. A mixture of the artist's intention and the subject can manifest in the print. The vibration and essence of the glacier can exist in an environment, the photograph, which is constructed by the artist. The product can be an image that is not labeled with a preconceived classification. When an image is unclassified, the mind tries to classify the image. This results in a deeper seeing and examination as the mind attempts to resolve and understand the image. The photographs in a portrait device hope to bring an awareness and connection to nature and glaciers, a bond that is not based on analytic data, but one that is felt through the subject's vibration and the use of instinctual color. Instinctual color emanates from the blurred space between artist and subject. The memory of color that remains of the subject is not rooted in its exterior surface, but in the subject's inner vibration. For instinctual color to move beyond memory, it requires a slow process of transference into the physical world. The vibration of the color is magnified by the removal of anything that distracts from the feeling or the essence of the subject or the artist's intention. In physical form, instinctual color recreates a memory of feeling that is born from interaction of the subject and the artist. A portrait device was a 2-year journey onto the glaciers of Patagonia, Iceland, Norway, New Zealand, and Alaska. Patagonia. The journey began with a plane that flew to the one-street town of El Calafate, the base camp for trips to Perito Moreno Glacier and the Torres del Paine Mountains. It was a 2-hour bus ride into Los Glaciers National Park, where a short boat crossing was the fastest way to access the terminus of the glacier. I thought frequently about the effect of living in New York City and not being able to see the horizon for months at a time. On the boat, I wondered, what if the glacier was photographed without a horizon? The 2 women guides had long black hair, coiled rope, a string of carabiners, ice screws, and polarized glasses. They demonstrated how to put on the 6-spike crampons, the homemade welding reminiscent of a time when blacksmiths fed their furnaces. Test out the ice, go slowly, make sure you have firm footing. It was surprisingly easy to walk. The glacier looked smooth, but up close, it is covered with bumpy crystal shards that could easily pierce the skin of the bare hands. Glaciers are living things, something in between a tree and a mountain. They can surge forward and retreat back many times in their lives. Glaciers grow with snowfall. Thousands and thousands of snowflakes melt and recrystallize, becoming denser and denser, passing through a state of coarse white crystals called firn before becoming glacier ice. The transformation from snow to glacier ice can span 100 years, but the Earth's ice can be much older. The Earth's ice has been ice for at least 1 million years. Perito Moreno was massive and the color was unreal. Photographs typically attempted to capture the snow cone color by creating a hyper-intensity. This approach leads to a disparity between the feeling and the visual representation of the subject. The large portrait, which is here, of Perito Moreno, which lay on my bamboo floor in New York City. The vast faint sky was balanced by the small portion of dense color in the ice. Scale became undefined without the reference of a horizon. In an attempt to name the blue, I found words inadequate. This began a deeper investigation into the process and function of color. From this extended period of thought came instinctual color. Because of this image of Perito Moreno, I decided to embark on a journey to photograph glaciers. The search for the right glaciers was lengthy. There was a desired color and texture that many of them lacked. In addition, the surrounding landscape needed to allow the horizon to be obscured. The search was aided by topographic maps, satellite imagery, snapshots, and word of mouth. Glaciers live in constant change, and the sketches that were constructed from the data were far from perfect. No matter the amount of prior research, seeing a glacier for the first time was like going on a blind date. So this is Perito Moreno, and this is the image that really started off the whole project. Perito Moreno is about 3 miles wide by 19 miles long. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Most of the images are vertical to replicate portraits, because within photography, a portrait is typically taken as a vertical plane, a landscape as a horizontal. There's a few horizontals in the book. All right, Iceland. Vatnajökull is Europe's largest ice cap. Glacier tongues spread in every direction from the ice cap and flowed into the ocean. Small pieces of ice rolled in with the waves, perfect glass breaking against the shore. Things were done differently here. The first rental car, which came from Bjorn, who not only rented cars but was also a guide, a writer, and worked with the main Icelandic printing press, had mechanical issues that prevented the car from easily turning left. Bjorn instructed me after a short phone conversation, drive an hour and a half outside of Reykjavik. There'll be a waterfall on the left. Park the car there, and there'll be a new car waiting for you after you go visit the waterfall. So I go out, an hour and a half, there's one waterfall, I hope it's the right one. Iceland is filled with waterfalls. I park the car, there's nobody there. I go to the waterfall, it's about 10 minutes away. I get back, and miraculously, there's a car waiting for me. His wife has driven from somewhere in Iceland and dropped off this new car, which now I can fully turn left, which is a huge relief, because otherwise you're just sort of making right-hand circles, which gets tiring after a while. Things were done differently here. In the glove box were instructions for what to do with a severed finger. The pamphlet warned that even on the main roads, it could take at least 24 hours for someone to come to your aid. This taken into account, the best thing to do with a severed finger was to put it in a Ziploc bag and surround it with ice. That way they might be able to reattach it at some future time. There were also other instructions for other maladies, all with graphic detail. The car sped down the road that led to Sólheimajökull. A river of dust engulfed the brown meltwater that ran beside the road. There was mist in the distance. I pushed the gas pedal down. I've always loved the mist, and I was afraid that I would lose it. The backpack bounced in the back, was fully equipped. Crampons were strapped to the back. The pack was stuffed with a camera, waterproof flashlight, knife, fluid, protein bars, extra center bars, an essential piece of fragile metal in the weak point, which functions to hold crampons together. The rocky moraine had been pushed forward at a time when the glacier still grew. Now it served evidence of how far the glacier had receded. I ran along the rocks, pulled on the crampons, and continued to run on the ice. The mist vanished, mountains, horizon. My heart sunk. This was my last day on the Icelandic glaciers. I waited not very patiently for a bit of luck. It started in the distance. The breath of Eyjafjallajökull blew down from its volcanic mouth and swallowed the mountains whole. The horizon disappeared, and the mist put its spell over me. Ash from the recent eruption insulated the ice and changed the melting pattern. The wind-blown ash collected in certain areas and became thicker. Here, it absorbed the sun, and the ice underneath melted slower than the surrounding ice. The result was a rare glacier landscape with scattered mounds that were reminiscent of the Serengeti. And this is Sólheimajökull. Don't kill me if the pronunciation is wrong. After Eyjafjallajökull went off the volcano a few years ago that stopped air traffic from Europe, there there were various Icelandic people trying to tell all of the American newscasters how to pronounce it. Not very easily, I tell you. This is one of the images. The Metropolitan Museum of Art took 3 images. This is one of them. And the last one from Solheimjökull. Now we have Flájökull. And here, there's the black sort of river in the background is also from ash from a volcanic eruption probably 50 or 100 years ago. And what happens is that the ash covers the entire glacier, and then as the glacier is moving, it's folding, so you're just getting the edge. And then because the glacier moves at different speeds, you start to get sort of this S-shaped pattern, and you can see where it's moving faster and where it's moving more slowly. Another similar shot. Now this is Flájökull, and you can imagine when the American military was there, they had a terrible time telling their pilots where to fly. So what did they do? Because they can't pronounce any of this. So they took the first letter, followed by the number of letters, so this would be F12. We're flying over F12. I mean, I don't think they really did the glaciers, but the major landmarks. Here again, we have some ash. Ash is very frequent on the Icelandic glaciers. Ash in the foreground. There's another short boat trip to get across. All right, Alaska. Iceworms are celebrated every winter in the small fishing town of Cordova, tiny creatures that live on the glacier and can only survive at freezing temperatures. If they get too warm, they melt. They are joined by a kind of moss called glacier mice. Within them is a gram of water, which is enough to house an ecosystem of life. With my guide, I watched the ice screw send up a solid core of ice from its center, instantaneously transforming the ice into a man-made cylinder. An ice screw can hold 2 tons of force. The guides always yelled at me for running, and I always ran. The guide warned that if I were to fall in a crevasse, I should choose one filled with water, because if you fall into the water, you'll float, and then hopefully you can be pulled out, and maybe you have a little hyperthermia, but hey, that's minor, you're still alive. If you fall into a crevasse that has no water, the likelihood is that the force of the fall wedges you between the crevasse, and you'll never get out. So in an effect, to try to stop me from running, he told me a story of 2 friends. One of them fell into such a dry crevasse. The one who was still on top on the glacier lowered a rope and pulled with all his strength. He pulled for hours and hours, but he couldn't get his friend out. Unable to do anything, he just listened. And he listened to his friend yelling and yelling until the yells grew fainter and fainter, and by morning, there was silence. Didn't get me to stop running, though, but it's a good story. When US soldiers traveled to Alaska, they were inspired by the beauty of glaciers. They named many of them after generals, hoping to gain the general's favor. The general for whom this glacier was named killed thousands of Indians in the 1800s. Sheridan was dusted with a yellow-orange tree pollen that made it look like a battlefield. And here's Sheridan, and all of the yellow, sort of yellowish sediment that's on the glacier is from tree pollen, which is from trees that are higher up on the mountainside. And then some dust, probably river dust in the foreground. New Zealand. New Zealand, it was often hard to find a guide, but even more of a challenge to train them. During the journey, they are responsible for human life. This breeds caution, something, often too much. Good thing there's a typewriter. If I was handwriting this stuff, there'd be a lot more of those. The one who adapted the fastest to my impulse to jump over crevasses was a guide from New Zealand. He was thin, with stringy but well-defined calves and forearms, dark, short hair. He didn't talk much, answering questions politely and whenever possible with a simple yes or no. On the way to the glacier, we listened to the windshield wipers squeak back and forth to the sound of static radio. Huge steps had been carved into the ice. Dozens of them led upward. a bizarre playground for adults to experience the glacier in safety. The path didn't last long, and soon the glacier took control of its own shape. Massive crevasses like waves moved down the slope, frozen in their movement. When we could no longer find a route, the silent guide scouted ahead. He spoke. "I think I found a way." The way was a fin of ice that tapered to the width of a crampon. The drop was 30 feet to either side. He placed the ice screw and turned it into the body of the glacier. If we fell, the screw would hold, but we would swing back and forth with a pendulum-like motion, hitting the narrow ice walls. I placed one foot in front of the other as if walking on a tightrope. 2 columns of ice faced each other. In between, space plummeted downward. The gap was just short of a leap. I took one breath and passed over the emptiness, my body unattached from any surface. For a moment, I was a part of the sky. And then I was on the other side, ascending to higher ground. The silent guide spoke as we walked next to each other along the crest of the ridge, a virtual highway. And these are Fox Glacier. And the town, Fox Glacier, became such a popular tourist destination. This is one of the easiest to access, that they named the town Fox Glacier Township. So you can see glaciers have real power, if you never thought that before. New York City is going to be changed soon to the name of a glacier that floods it, which is happening soon as oceans rise, right? Seas rise. This is another one that's in the Met's collection. And this is Franz Joseph. And there's a Maori legend for Franz Joseph, which says that Franz Joseph formed because of a princess. It's always a princess. And her lover went into the mountains, into the glacier, and died. And her tears then caused this glacier of Franz Joseph to form. So if you cry a lot, you might be able to help stop climate change. It's also good for the eyes, so it's, you get like a benefit on the side. Norway. Tungsbergdalsbreen was 4 miles by kayak and 2 miles by foot. Norway was in the middle of 50-year floods. Farmlands were covered in feet of water. Highways were closed or washed away. With 4 days of constant rain, I had a new roommate who shared my tent, a growing puddle of water that I occasionally scooped out with my hands so it wouldn't become too large. Shoes sloshed with every step. Waterproof jacket let as much rain in as it kept out. Everything was wet. The path to the glacier required crossing a footbridge made of 2 fallen trees. Spanning the trees were 2x4s alternating with open space. A wobbly rope strung at waist level acted as a railing. The normally calm water was white with rapids. It rose through the open spaces and gushed over the slats. At the glacier, the clouds continued to send constant rain. Because of the weather, the valley was hidden from the low clouds, and the glacier became a massive plain of ice without an edge or an end. When shooting, I used a plastic bag to cover my camera from the elements. When not in use, the camera stayed warm and protected against my chest. Not a very sophisticated system. To take a picture was a multi-step process. First unzip the jacket, then find and place the wet bag over the camera. Pull the camera out from safety and check the lens. Every few shots, the lens would fog up or become covered in a fine mist. Then I'd have to clean it. I would lift up all of my layers and grab the edge of my long underwear shirt, not so different from a lens cloth. As the day went on, more and more corners of my shirt were wet, and I had to become creative about where to pull from. The cuff of the sleeve, the neck, the chest, the belly. And this is Nygardspren, and Nygardspren got its name because it surged in the 1700s. It surged about 3 miles, and it covered a farm, and the farm was called Nygard. And Bren means glacier, so you have This is Tungsberg Dalsbreen. Most glaciers have some kind of story to them. This glacier, there was a plague in a nearby town, and so they didn't use any of the routes to cover the glacier, to traverse across the glacier to nearby towns because of the plague. And 2.5 years later, when they were pretty sure the plague was gone, they found one person surviving who was a woman, and supposedly, according to legend, she never spoke again. So if you talk too much, you can go to a glacier, and it will keep you quiet. These are the last few shots, and they're the only shots of meltwater that are included in the book. So 2.5 years from the first exposure, a portrait of ice was on press in Italy. The acrid smell of wet ink gave shape to the glaciers. The speed at which the sheets traveled gave the illusion they were an endless expanse of white. Thank you, guys. If you have questions, let me know. Or you can make my life easy and cut it out.
Yes.
Can you talk more about the color? I mean, just anything you would care to say about it. Could that be more specific, or would you just want to say?
More specific would be great. Am I still, or did I die?
I think I turned the wrong mic down. Here, try that.
Okay, more specific is, fabulous.
Well, maybe you said this, and I didn't understand for sure, but is the color in some sense enhanced, even in the sense that you were talking about earlier, that you're trying to give an impression rather than a capture of something? I guess that's, I just wanted you to talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think with photography, one has to realize that nothing is ever real. No matter what camera you take it with, no matter what film, or now it's digital, there's no such thing as reality within photography. It's just not only is it a moment in time, but it's an angle. The color can never be exactly true to real life because it's not real life. So if we start with that assumption that nothing is real, no photography is real, then maybe it makes it a little easier to continue. The color here, like Perito Moreno, for example, the first one, is probably more saturated in real life than it was in these photographs. So for me, I think I didn't go about this to try to document glaciers and try to represent them as we see them. Instead, my goal was to try to represent how they felt to me. And color was one of the main aspects of this, or one of the large aspects of this. I don't know if that helps you. But the blue glaciers are blue. They weren't like, I don't know, purple. Well, purple's pretty close. Actually, they are purple because of the UV light, but we can't see the UV light. So if we could see the UV light, they would all be purple, but we don't have that vision. Maybe like the manta shrimp, I think they have like 13 cones and we have 3. Anyway, they have a lot more cones than we have. So maybe that helps, maybe not.
Kelly,
Yeah.
would you talk a little bit about the scale of the glaciers? Because one of the characteristics of the photographs is that they're very difficult to tell how expansive they are, how tall the various features are. How big are they?
Yeah, that's the question I have myself. How big are they? You get on them and they take over your whole life. So you should really, if you haven't been on a glacier, especially a hard ice glacier, these are all hard ice glaciers, and what I mean by that is that if it's covered in snow, you still have the glacier underneath, but what you're seeing essentially is the snow. So like I grew up in Colorado, hey, snow is snow. If there's a glacier underneath, that's fabulous, but if I'm not seeing it, then I'm not really interacting with the glacier. So the hard ice glaciers basically means that you're going at a time when there's no snow there. I'm getting around to your question, just starting slowly. So they're very expansive. As I said, Perito Moreno, which was this first one, is 3 miles, all of these, is about 3 miles wide by 19 miles long. The scale of something like this, I don't know, this mound on the left is probably, I don't know, 50 feet high maybe? I don't remember exactly, but you know, you're reasonably small on most of them. And I think part of the reason that there's no, it's hard to define the scale because there's no horizon. I think that's one of the main elements which has been taken away. And one of the things that this does, aside from take away the sense of scale, is I think that it also allows the viewer to look more carefully at the image because it's not something that we can easily classify. And so we don't say, oh, I've seen this before, and then we can move on. And I think for anyone, if anybody is doing photography, I think you really have to find a way to make your image not only good and clean and all of this, but find a way to make it something that hasn't been seen before. And of course, in the beginning, you're going to go through all these stages of replicating other people. But in the end, you have to come up with something that's your own visual signature and your own way of looking at things. And then that's going to hopefully allow other people to look at your images more closely or spend more time with them. So scale, right, 50 feet or so. I can go on digressions if you hadn't noticed yet.
A number of years ago, my wife and I were traveling in Alaska and had an opportunity to walk upon glacier. And when you talk about blue and glacier being blue, it isn't as though you're standing there in your brown coat and, or your gray coat and you're looking at an object that's blue. The entire environment seemed to us to be blue. It was like everything was blue. Our skin looked blue. Our clothing looked blue. Everything looked blue. Did you find that to be the case, or is my recollection getting screwed up?
Well, the recollection is the real thing. It's kind of like a photograph, like memory. You know, what is real memory in the same way that what is a real photograph? So then, if it's real to you, I would argue that it's real. I was probably so focused on being out there and trying to find photographs. Often I would spend 10 plus hours on a glacier, and I would only photograph for half an hour or 20 minutes because of the light, because of finding something that's interesting, and the whole combination of things. So is your skin blue? I mean, I think there's a lot of reflection off of the glacier as well, so that light is going to be bluer. So I suppose your skin would be more blue. I don't know if it would be Smurf blue, but just a shade. I'll go with that. Yeah.
Your title is a portrait of ice, and just as a portrait of a person may reveal personality traits or information about how they lived their life or where they might be going. Are there messages in your photographs that we can search for to maybe find, did you feel as though there were almost a personality from one glacier to the next, little differences that we should look for?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things is that just going through, so these were Perito Moreno. These are very different than, for instance, these photographs or these glaciers. And they feel quite different. So just visually, there's now this sense that glaciers are different, that not all of the glaciers look the same. And they are all vastly different. The things that one, I suppose, can look for is usually something with more texture means that the glacier is moving faster. And that was something, I wanted more texture, even though some of them don't have texture. As I said, you never know. You get to the glacier, and it's like mystery. The thing looks like this, You know, you get some Google image snapshot from some scientist in 1989, it looks like this, and then you go there and you're like, huh? Maybe I'm on the wrong part, you know, since they are 20 miles long and it's hard to navigate. But they are, I don't know if there's hidden messages. I think if you knew the science behind glaciers, you might be able to tell that one was a fast-moving glacier or one had receded more. But I don't have, for me, it's mainly just about the feeling, really.
I was wondering what your favorite reaction that you've seen people have to your photographs. I mean, what do they, as sort of an anecdote, what do people come away from that you really like? That they'll tell you, I looked at this and I never thought this way before, I never felt this way before, anything like that that you can share with us?
I mean, I think that definitely not being able to sense a scale, I think that seems to be an obvious effect for people. I mean, how many people have been on glaciers? Oh, so that's actually a pretty good crowd. That's good. And hard ice glaciers? Okay. That's not bad, not bad. Usually there's not very many people. But most people in the US, I would say, there's more of a chance that we've been to some form of a desert than to a glacier, or at least to a sand dune. So you could, with one big sand dune, you kind of imagine the Sahara. But with glaciers, most of us don't. I mean, they're becoming more touristic now, and so more and more people, I guess, will see glaciers. But we don't have a feeling for this ecosystem, and so I think just bringing an awareness that is not the typical sort of wide-angle shot that's sort of awe-inspiring for a second, but then after that, for most of us, we've seen them before, and we don't really spend any time with them. Yeah, I mean, I hope that these can have some small influence on people. There goes another roundabout answer. I'm good at roundabout answers. Maybe if somebody asks a roundabout question, I'll give a direct answer. Yeah.
So kind of going back to scale, I'm curious what angle you were taking these pictures from. Were you just standing there, or did you crouch down for most of the pictures, or kind of what angle were you on the peaks or in the valley when you were taking the pictures?
I mean, I was on the glaciers the whole time. The peaks and valleys of most of the glaciers are quite far apart. So the subject's not that far away. I mean, everything was shot with a 50-millimeter lens for those who have any photography experience. Part of that is because I'm just, like, all this technical stuff. I'm very good technically on one hand, but on the other hand, switching lenses and deciding which one to put on, and it's a headache. So a 50-millimeter lens, it makes it easy. You lift it up. I know exactly what fits into a 50-millimeter frame. I hardly even need the camera there. And yeah, so crouching, some of them are crouching, I guess. Some of them are standing. They're all on the body of the glacier. That's pretty specific, right? Getting a reputation now. All right. Yeah.
Is there a difference in the blue from one side of the world to the other, from one continent to another? Is it the same blue from the same natural processes? Or, I mean, I've never been to Iceland or...
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, probably there's some variable there, but mostly the reason that glaciers are blue is because of the density of the ice. So you get more and more density, and then it just starts refracting only blue light, kind of in the same way that water does. So the same glacier, if you were to go back to one of these glaciers that I've been at, the color is probably going to have changed, because they don't maintain a constant color, because they'll have more snow, they'll have less snow, they'll have melted more, they'll have gotten thinner, thicker, and all of that is going to affect the color. But in terms of, are they different around the world? I would be inclined to say that probably, if the longitude and latitude might affect it, but I would be inclined to say it's more likely that the glacier itself and how the glacier is changing has a larger effect on the color. Wow, so many at once. It's overwhelming.
When you first took the picture of the glacier, the very first picture, how did you feel? How was this different from when you were in New York? How did you feel?
How is it different from New York? I mean, I grew up in Colorado, and getting away, New York is filled with skyscrapers. Probably you know that already, but what one might not realize, I didn't, is that there's also like electricity going all the way up. And that sounds silly, but really I think it has an effect on us when we're living there. So this was sort of part of my sanity, was to get away. The first picture, when I got it back, when I printed it out, I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. Maybe I should start this project. And then that was that, I guess. All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So with the idea behind these photos being a portrait of ice,
Yeah.
why in many of them is there more atmosphere in glacier?
Right. So, and you can't really tell this on the slides, which is probably the case, because there's pretty much no boundary here. Which, can we find one with some boundary? Because you can't really tell where the edge of the picture is. Which, if you go over to the museum, you'll be able to see the photographs in real life with the proper color, and you'll actually see a boundary because there's nothing that's paper white, really. Let's see if I can find one that sort of, God, even these don't show up. Huh. Right. But anyway, so having all of the space on the front, on the top, it does a couple of things. One is that it makes the whole photograph much lighter. It gives it an airy feel. If the reverse were true, it would feel very grounded and very compressed, rather than feel like it's lifting up. And then also, by having all of this empty space, it allows us to focus more on the ice. So in a way, I think that it becomes more of a portrait of ice than if it was filled up with ice. Because basically, we have this visual frame, and we have so much energy that we can put into the visual frame. So now, if the visual frame is this big, but there's only ice in this much more of the eye is going to now go towards the ice, and more of the energy is going to go towards the ice, focusing on that. Does that kind of answer something? Surprised people are still asking questions after all these answers. All right. Yeah. Sounds like there's a couple of questions there.
Oh, sorry.
Let's start with, do I consider them more alive than looking at these photographs? I would say the intention of these photographs probably, I think it's different to see something as a portrait and to see it as alive. So I'm not sure, alive in terms of in between a tree and a mountain, I'm not sure if that's like my goal necessarily to put forth with the pictures, but alive in terms of a differentiation between glaciers and starting to take on some kind of personality is something that I would say.
Kind of more alive as in just like the entire environment and how you feel in it. It's like, do you feel more?
Oh, do I feel more alive when I'm on the glaciers?
Well, sort of, or just, or
Do the glaciers feel more alive with me there? Definitely, because we play a lot. I can show you how I run on the glacier. Well, no, there's no crampons. Never mind.
No. Sorry. Just what I meant was like I really don't know how to say this. But just when you were on the glaciers,
Yeah.
did you just look around and feel kind of more like at peace, or were you more like worried about yourself and like your body condition and all that?
Oh, right. Well, that I can answer. Whew. Had both of us sweating now. Yeah, so no, I wasn't too much worried about myself most of the time, much to my guide's dismay. It's definitely very quiet. I mean, on the glaciers, if you have no other people, which it was myself and a guide, and the guides usually don't talk too much, although some of them talk a lot. If they're not talking, it's totally quiet except for your steps in the ice, which is the metal against the ice. So yeah, it's definitely a very calm, meditative place, for me at least. In terms of the risks, I mean, everybody sees risk in a different way. If I jump down from the edge of this podium, some people are going to say, oh my God, don't let your kid do that. Don't jump. And some parents will be like, yeah, let the kid jump off. Maybe this is a too young crowd for that, but you get my point. So we all have different ideas of what risk is. And for me, I was just happy to be outside. Yeah.
Question about memory. You said you grew up in Colorado. Have you been on the glaciers before you started this project, Partners Glaciers? And was some of your interest in the topic or what led you to it or how you dealt with it to some extent conditioned by memory?
Well, I would say everything is conditioned by memory. But yeah, I think growing up, I've been on a few glaciers, but I think more than the glaciers was probably growing up in the mountains and living in New York City for the last 10 years and really, I miss the mountains. Or I miss just even the nature. I mean, Central Park, come on. Oh, God bless Central Park, but it's, tiny sort of over there. So yeah, so I think it definitely, some of it is because I grew up in a mountain environment that would make me do something like this.
We know that you have kind of a special interest in glaciers by your show and how you talk about them. But are there any other geological features that you have any interest in or possibly photograph other than the glaciers, or possibly are planning to do any projects with?
I think I have interest in potentially everything, whether geological or otherwise. There's very few things probably that I don't have interest in, at least for short periods of time. I don't have any projects planned around geological features right now. Yeah.
Would you say that you were influenced by other artists?
Well, I would say that I have at some point been influenced by other artists. At this point, that influence becomes an amalgam. And at this point, I think with this body of work, I'm beyond, a direct influence of other artists.
Are there any other questions for our speaker?
I understand this question, and I think I could rephrase it better. So most people usually think about glaciers as something that we are losing because of environmental changes. Do you feel as though, since you actually visited the glacier, it's still something that we're losing? Do you feel sad when you think about the loss, or do you just, when you went, did you just marvel at its beauty and
Hey, I don't know who's marveling here. But marveling at, no, I'm kidding. I can become attached to things very easily. Well, possibly. But I'm definitely attached to like nature, and I'm now also attached to glaciers. And so when a glacier disappears or is disappearing, that does give me sadness. I'm not sure that being on the glacier made it, increased that sadness or not, but just getting to know the glaciers allowed that attachment to happen, and then from attachment, then you can get sadness. If you're not attached, you're not going to have any sadness. Does that answer the question adequately? Something? Any more questions? Yeah.
Are you considering going back in a few years to see if the glaciers have changed?
I mean, my memory is ethereal, like all of ours. So if I were to go back, I'm not sure how much I would know exactly how much it changed or not. There's some great photographers who have done work on documenting the glaciers and the way they change, such as like Baylog, who has set up cameras which photograph at increments, and you can see literally the transition of time in the glaciers, or the effect of time on glaciers. Thank you.